As a backdrop to everything we've been discussing tonight is a cultural decline. How can people of faith move forward? In a new book, my next guest suggests that we may be heading down a dangerous path toward totalitarianism. He's the senior editor at the American Conservative and author of the new book, Live Not by Lies, a manual for Christian dissidents. Please welcome back to the program, Rod Dreher. Rod, why did you write this book now, and after the events of the last 4 years, did you realize how prescient it would be?
No, I had no idea how prescient it would be, Raymond. I got a call 5 years ago from a Catholic doctor in Minnesota who said, look, I have to tell somebody this. My mother is elderly, lives with me and my wife. She spent 6 years in a communist prison in her home country of Czechoslovakia for her Catholic faith. And now she says that the same things that she got away from in Czechoslovakia seem to be occurring right here in America. I thought that was really alarmist. So then I started talking to other people here in America, immigrants who had come from communist countries, and every one of them, Raymond, say the same thing. It's happening here, and they're upset that Americans can't see it. I thought when I wrote this book finally earlier this year that I would have a tough time trying to sell it to people, trying to convince my fellow Americans and fellow Christians that we were facing a situation as dire as this. But after the events of the last 5 months, I have no trouble being able to convince people that we really are in a very, very bad situation.
Rod, explain the significance of the title, Live Not by Lies, aside from the obvious moral implication. It's a quote.
Yeah, it is a quote. The great Soviet dissident Alexander Solzhenitsyn, on the eve of being expelled from the Soviet Union in 1974, he sent out an essay to all of his followers with the title, Live Not by Lies. What he meant by that was saying to his people that, listen, we don't have any power here in this totalitarian government, but the one thing we can do is stand up for the truth and never, ever, ever consent to lies. I think that's good advice for us, too, and this growing soft totalitarianism we see here.
Well, it's harder and harder to do it, Rod, and part of that is there are people policing the borders, ideological borders that they've created, that the truth is not welcome in many places. Look, I could show you, if we had a few hours, the scars from reporting both inside and outside the church. They will attack you ruthlessly for daring to just say, wait a minute, let's look at this. Maybe there's another thing happening here that we're missing. Now, in researching the book, you interviewed many people, men and women who lived under communism in various forms. So many people thought with the fall of the Berlin Wall, that was the end of it. There was no need to fear communism any longer. What did these people tell you of their experience, and what are they most concerned about looking at the U.S. today?
Yeah, it's not that they fear the return of communism per se. They don't think that's coming back, and I don't think that's coming either. But it's rather a different form of totalitarianism. It doesn't have to be the sort of George Orwell Stalinist form involving secret police and gulags. Rather, this is going to be more of a soft totalitarianism, like from Aldous Huxley's Brave New World. To be specific, it's going to be a case of major corporations, institutions, and perhaps even the government manipulating people by controlling access to jobs, to the economy, and to privileges. And this is the sort of thing that these dissidents are trying to tell us. It's happening in America, and just because it doesn't involve jackboots doesn't mean it's not totalitarianism.
Well, look, I took a trip recently. I won't say to what state, but I landed in the state. For the next 4 days, I got called by contact tracers wanting to know, where are you now? Who have you been with? Have you been tested? Can you give us a rundown of where you are in our state? Where are you staying? I've never seen anything like this. What do you see as the most glaring similarities between totalitarianism in the last century and what we're seeing in the political realm today?
Right. Well, there's a difference between authoritarianism and totalitarianism. Authoritarianism is when all the political power is concentrated in one leader or one party, but they don't care about the rest of society. Totalitarianism is an extreme form of authoritarianism in which they want to control your mind and your soul, too. You have to learn to love Big Brother. And that's the sort of thing that we're seeing now. The cancel culture from the progressives has ramped up so much that you can't even be silent anymore. Your silence is taken as a sign of your own guilt. That's the thing that we have to worry about. Just today, I posted on my blog something about transgenderism and youth. There are people out there, activists, parents who are desperate to get people to listen to them and the media to listen about the way transgenderism is exploiting our youth and how schools are even collaborating to deceive parents. Nobody will talk about it because you'll lose your job, you'll lose your livelihood. This sort of thing is happening right now in the land of the free.
Now, critics of your point of view would dismiss your premise as alarmist, Rod. That they say, look, that's not going to happen here in the U.S. This is still a beacon of freedom and democracy around the world. After all, the government isn't rolling tanks into the streets. There's no declaration of martial law. Is it the government that we have to worry about in this scenario? Or is it something else? Is it Is it pop culture? Is it the universities? What are you talking about here?
Yeah, it's primarily big business. And this is one thing that makes it so hard for American conservatives to understand, so-called woke capitalism. You might remember, Raymond, about 5 years ago when the state of Indiana passed its religious freedom restoration law. It was an ordinary thing, just a state version of the federal law. But big business came down like a ton of bricks on the state, and the state backed down. I think we're going to be seeing that sort of thing more and more happen in this country. And as long as we are just looking to the government as the sole source of totalitarianism, we're going to miss what's happening. What's also happening is these major corporations are taking in so much data from us, as you were mentioning earlier, from our smartphones, from our computers, and they're storing this data. It will be used against us, just like the Chinese are doing now with their social credit system. We're going to have an American social credit system.
Is any of this reversible at this point? Or are we rushing headlong into this soft totalitarianism, this wokeness that you talk about, and we just have to deal with it?
Well, no, I hope it's reversible, and I think that we should not surrender to it. Yeah. Well, we have to vote for good political leaders who are courageous enough to stand up against it and to get good judges on the court. That's one reason I'm very happy with Amy Coney Barrett. On the other hand, Raymond, we really cannot allow ourselves to think that just voting for the right people or getting the right judges is going to be enough. This totalitarianism is succeeding by taking over the culture, especially elite culture. One thing I learned from talking to these people in the communist countries is it always starts with the elites, but it spreads out from there. This is happening. The sort of things that we were seeing 10, 15 years ago only at universities is now moving out into corporate boardrooms and to high schools, elementary schools. It's really alarming.
Do younger people especially lack the knowledge of history, what you call the cultural memory, to really combat this? How critical is that cultural memory to avoid the mistakes of the past?
It's absolutely critical, and you're right. We just haven't taught history to our young people. The whole communist
era. Well, we taught them a history. It's a twisted, I would argue, ideologically informed history, and that's the problem.
Sure. And the whole communist era has been memory holed by Hollywood. I mean, my kids know more about the Nazi era than the communist era just from watching TV and popular culture. We have got to do better about that because controlling cultural memory is key to controlling a people. In my book, I talk about young Pope John Paul II, Karol Wojtyła. When he was in Nazi-occupied Poland, he knew that the Nazis were going to try to control the Poles by destroying their memory of themselves as a nation and destroying their Catholic faith. So he couldn't take up weapons against them. The Nazis were too powerful. So what Wojtyła and his friends did were write plays about Polish patriotic history and also about their Catholic faith to keep that cultural memory alive. They performed these plays in the face of the Gestapo. If the Gestapo had burst in to catch them, they would have executed them, but they did it. We have to do things just like that.
You're an Orthodox Christian, Rod. You've always written extensively about faith. You end the book with a chapter on suffering. You call it a gift, and learning to endure suffering well, being so important during these times. Why?
Boy, that is one of the most profound lessons of this whole project for me, Raymond, was talking to people, mostly Catholics and Orthodox, but also a Russian Baptist, who said that if Christians are not able to suffer for the truth and for our Lord, they're not going to make it through this persecution. If we're not willing to suffer the scorn of our neighbors, a loss of job, a loss of our individual liberty, and maybe even the loss of life, We're not going to have what it takes to make it through what's coming. This is the testimony of the church since the foundation of the church. Our church was a church of martyrs, and now we are going to see that being made, martyrs being made again and again. I don't want to be pessimistic, Raymond. I'm not optimistic about the future, but I am hopeful because as Christians, we know that Christian hope doesn't mean that everything's going to work out great in the end, but it means that if we suffer and unite our sufferings to Christ, the Lord will use that for redemption. That's the kind of hope that these people in the communist countries can offer us, and that's, I think, the only hope we have.
Well, and in reading the book, I take a slightly more positive view than you do after reading your book. The John Paul II example, the example of some of the people you interviewed, they became the light in the darkness of that time. They continued to broadcast that light and, as you say, remind people of why we're here, who we are, what our place in this world and in this nation is. That I think we have to dedicate ourselves to and not always get mired down in these tit-for-tat arguments that I think become ideological struggles of no significance. It's those cultural lights that shine in the end. And that's what I took from the book. And when it's all over, when all is said and done, that's what remains. So thank you for that reminder. Live Not by Lies, a manual for Christian dissidents by Rod Dreher is available now online and at bookstores everywhere. Thank you, Rod.
Thank you, Raymond.